The United States federal system houses some of the most notorious criminals, many of whom are awaiting execution. These individuals have committed heinous crimes, including mass murder, terrorism, and violent hate crimes. In this video, we will focus on 6 of the most dangerous criminals currently on federal death row, all held in some of the most secure prisons in the world. Anzorovich Tsar, July 22, 1993. Anzorovich, Jahar. Tsarnaev was born on July 26, 1993, in Kyrgyzstan, the youngest son of Chechen parents. His family immigrated to the United States in 2002, and Jahar became a U.S. citizen just 7 months before the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings. Jahar grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and studied mechanical engineering at the University of Massachusetts. Despite his academic background, he was radicalized and, along with his brother, Tamerlan, carried out the horrific bombings at the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring more than 260. On April 15, 2013, Boston was filled with energy and excitement, as the annual marathon attracted participants and spectators from all over the world. The streets were packed with runners and spectators, all rejoicing in the athletes' achievements. However, among the crowd, a young man, Anzorovich Tsarnaev, was planning a terrible attack. Jahar was living a normal life like any other student at the University of Massachusetts, studying mechanical engineering. He spent his time studying, playing sports and socializing with friends, and no one suspected that he was hatching a heinous plan. As the runners approached the marathon finish line, the atmosphere was filled with excitement. People cheered and congratulated the participants for their efforts, but no one knew that in just a few seconds, this joy would turn into a nightmare. At 2:49 p.m., the first bomb exploded near the finish line, followed by the second just 12 seconds later. The explosions caused terrible devastation, claiming the lives of 3 people: Martin Richard, an 8-year-old boy, Crystal Campbell, a 29-year-old woman, and Lingzi Liu, a 23-year-old Chinese student. More than 260 others were injured, many of whom required emergency treatment. However, after the attack, Jahar remained calm, showing no signs of remorse. He continued his normal life, going to school, going to the gym, and even partying with friends, living as if nothing had happened. After the attack, a massive manhunt began. Boston was put on lockdown, and authorities were scrambling to find the perpetrators of the terrorist attack. Jahar and his brother Tamerlan, who died in a confrontation with police, became the target of the largest manhunt in American history. For days, police cordoned off areas of the city, checking every lead. Finally, on April 19, 2013, the manhunt ended when Jahar was found hiding in a boat in the backyard of a home in Watertown, Massachusetts. A local resident spotted him and called the police. When officers approached, they opened fire but were ordered to stop to avoid injuring Jahar. After a tense standoff, he was arrested and taken to the hospital to be treated for his injuries. The trial of Anzorovich Tsarnaev began in 2015, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. The bombing was meticulously planned, and Jahar's involvement was undeniable. During the sentencing phase, the prosecution presented gruesome details of his actions, while the defense team tried to mitigate the sentence, arguing that Jahar was heavily influenced by his brother Tamerlan. However, the jury found him guilty on all charges and recommended the death penalty on 6 counts. Asked if he had anything to say before his sentencing, Jahar stood up, thanked the judge and his attorney, and apologized to the victims and their families, saying, "I pray for your peace, for your healing. I am sorry for the lives I took, for the suffering I caused, for the irreparable damage I caused." In June 2015, a federal judge sentenced Jahar to death. As of April 2025, he is still serving his sentence at ADX Florence, Colorado, which is known for housing some of America's most dangerous criminals. Jahar Tsarnaev's journey from promising student to convicted terrorist is a harrowing reminder of the power of radicalization and its devastating consequences. The Boston Marathon bombing left a permanent scar on the city of Boston, the families of the victims, and the country. Jahar's story is a chilling example of how a seemingly ordinary individual could become the perpetrator of one of the most horrific attacks in American history. The legacy of this act continues to affect the community and the victims. Dylan Storm Roof, April 3, 1994, age 31, Columbia, South Carolina, U.S. Dylan Storm Roof, April 3, 1994, age 31, Columbia, South Carolina, U.S. Dylan Storm Roof is the name of one of the most shocking criminals in American history. In June 2015, at the age of 21, Roof carried out a bloody attack at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. The incident not only shocked the country, but also left a deep scar in the African American community. In this story, we will explore Roof's journey from an ordinary young man to a cold-blooded criminal with horrific actions. On June 17, 2015, the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston became the scene of a horrific massacre that no one could have expected. Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old man with radical ideology, entered the church during a Bible study session. Roof was warmly welcomed by the church members, but during the session, he secretly planned his crime. When the session ended and the church members were about to join in prayer, Roof suddenly stood up and pulled out a gun and opened fire on them. In the attack, 9 people were killed, including Pastor Clementa C. Pinckney, who was also a South Carolina state senator. The victims were predominantly African American, and Roof's actions were clearly racially motivated, targeting the black community. Roof not only took the lives of innocent people, but also left the entire nation facing the pain of racial division and the rise of hate. Roof was not a simple young man, but a white supremacist. Before committing the crime, Roof shared extremist views on social media and connected with hate groups that advocated racism. His actions were not random, but the result of a radicalized ideology, which Roof absorbed in an environment full of hate. During the trial, Roof admitted that his motive was hatred of African Americans, and he considered this action a response to the injustices that he believed white people had suffered. During the investigation, Roof showed no remorse. He even laughed when talking about his actions and did not once express remorse or apologize to the victims. The hateful ideology that Roof pursued not only ruined the lives of innocent people, but also exacerbated the polarization in American society. After the attack, Roof quickly fled the scene and fled Charleston. However, after a massive manhunt, Roof was arrested a day later at a traffic stop in Shelby, North Carolina. A woman recognized his car and notified the police. This was a sign of the community's concern and attention to Roof's actions, even as he attempted to escape justice. When arrested, Roof did not resist and cooperated with the police. During the investigation, he admitted to carrying out the massacre and asserted that he acted out of racial motives. His electronic documents were examined and confirmed that he had connections to extremist groups and had shared hateful views on social media platforms. In 2017, Dylan Roof was tried and convicted on the 33 counts, including hate crimes. During sentencing, Roof testified in his own defense, offering no evidence or witnesses to mitigate his guilt. The trial ended with a jury sentencing him to death, making Roof one of the most notorious death row inmates in American history. However, after President Joe Biden issued a stay of execution for 37 death row inmates, Roof upheld his death sentence, demonstrating his determination to prosecute brutal criminals like Roof. Roof is currently incarcerated at Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana, where he faces a lengthy appeals process. Dylann Roof is a symbol of extremism and hatred in modern society. The massacre at Emmanuel Church has caused deep trauma to the African American community and society as a whole. The legacy of this act is not only the pain of the victims, but also a warning to society about the dangers of racist ideology and extremist groups. Roof's story is a lesson in the cruelty and long-term consequences of harboring hatred in the heart. Robert Bowers, Pennsylvania, US, age 51. Robert Gregory Bowers is a notorious criminal, known for carrying out the bloody attack at the Tree of Life Church in Pittsburgh on October 27, 2018. This was the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history. This attack shocked not only the Jewish community, but also the entire country, because of the cruelty and hateful motives that Bowers carried within him. This story will delve into Bowers' journey from an ordinary man to the most terrifying murderer in the history of crimes against the Jewish community. On the morning of October 27, 2018, the Pittsburgh Jewish community was attending Shabbat services at the Tree of Life Synagogue. It was a morning like any other, with worshippers sitting in peace, praying, and engaging in religious activities. However, just as the service was about to end, Robert Bowers, armed with a rifle, suddenly burst in and opened fire on innocent people. The attack left 11 people dead, including many elderly worshippers. The victims, including those who were attending prayers, were unable to fight back in time. Bowers' brutality left the community in disbelief. Police and emergency personnel quickly arrived on the scene, but the damage was too great. This was not just a simple murder, but an act of hate against the Jewish community. Robert Bowers was no ordinary criminal. Prior to the attack, he had openly expressed his hatred of Jews on social media platforms. Bowers had participated in hate groups where he freely shared extremist views and promoted violence against the Jewish community. His messages showed a deep-seated hostility towards Jews, which led to his heinous crime. Throughout the investigation, Bowers showed no remorse and, on the contrary, he was proud of his actions. Bowers' extremist ideology was not limited to his online posts, but also manifested in actual acts of violence. His victims, all innocent people, simply attending a religious service, paid with their lives because of the hatred Bowers carried within him. After the attack, Bowers was quickly apprehended by police. A massive manhunt was launched immediately, and within hours, he was arrested at the scene. During the investigation, Bowers showed no fear or remorse for his actions. He admitted to carrying out the attack for racial reasons and openly expressed hatred for the Jewish community. Authorities quickly gathered evidence and concluded that Bowers had carefully planned the attack. Before the attack, he had shared his extremist views on social media and had repeatedly expressed support for hate groups. This evidence not only confirms Bowers' motives, but also makes clear the extent of his radicalization. In 2023, Bowers was tried and convicted on the 63 counts, including murder, hate crimes, and use of a weapon to commit murder. During the trial, Bowers' attorney argued that he was suffering from a mental health condition. However, the jury did not accept this and sentenced Bowers to death. Bowers has shown no remorse for his actions, and his death sentence is not only a recognition of his murderous crimes, but also a reminder of the dangers of extremist ideology in modern society. He is currently incarcerated at Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana, awaiting execution. Robert Bowers is a typical example of radicalized individuals who let hatred and extremist ideology drive their actions. The attack at the Tree of Life Church was not only an act of murder, but also an attack on the entire Jewish community and the foundation of tolerance in American society. The legacy of this act will continue to haunt the community and it reminds us of the dangers of racism and hatred, which can lead to heinous crimes. Terry Nichols, North America, age 70. Terry Nichols, born April 1, 1955, in Lapeer, Michigan, was one of Timothy McVeigh's co-conspirators in the Oklahoma City bombing. Nichols grew up in a middle-class, well-educated family, but he developed anti-government and extremist views throughout his adult life. Nichols served in the U.S. Army, but after leaving the service, he gradually became influenced by extremist ideologies and became involved in terrorism. The Oklahoma City bombing on April 19, 1995, changed his life forever. Terry Nichols, Timothy McVeigh's co-defendant in the Oklahoma City bombing, is one of the most feared and brutal terrorists in American history. Although he did not directly carry out the attack, Nichols played a key role in preparing and assisting McVeigh in carrying out one of the deadliest terrorist acts in American history. Nichols' story not only reflects the radicalization of an individual, but also teaches a lesson about the dangers of extremist groups and hatred of the government. On the morning of April 19, 1995, Oklahoma City witnessed a deadly and devastating bombing. The bombing, carried out by Timothy McVeigh, killed 168 people, including 19 children. McVeigh's target was a federal building, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, which housed many government employees. However, the attack was not a one-man operation, but the result of a coordinated effort between McVeigh and his accomplice, Terry Nichols. Nichols did not carry out the bombing, but he provided crucial assistance, from helping McVeigh procure making materials to contributing to the planning of the attack. Immediately after the bombing, a manhunt began for the perpetrator. McVeigh was quickly arrested when he was stopped by police for not wearing a seat belt during a traffic patrol. Nichols, though not arrested at the time, was tracked and eventually arrested a short time later. Nichols' arrest brought to a close one of the most horrific attacks in American history. Terry Nichols is a classic example of radicalization, from an ordinary man to an accomplice in a terrorist attack. Nichols served in the U.S. Army and had a relatively normal past, but during his adult years he became involved in extremist groups and anti-government ideologies. Nichols and McVeigh had a close relationship, both of them sharing the same views on opposing the government and government agencies. During his interrogations, Nichols admitted that he was involved in planning the bombing, and although he did not carry out the attack, he played a key role in preparing and assisting McVeigh. Nichols provided important information on the procurement of bomb-making materials and helped McVeigh escape after the attack. Although Nichols was not present at the scene at the time of the bombing, his role in carrying out this terrorist act is undeniable. Terry Nichols was charged with several crimes, including first-degree murder and terrorism. Although Nichols did not carry out the bombing, his involvement in the preparation and support of McVeigh made him ineligible for criminal responsibility. In 1997, Nichols was sentenced to death in Colorado for his role in the attack. However, Nichols' sentence was later overturned, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This incident is a clear demonstration of the seriousness of being an accessory to terrorist attacks. Nichols, although not directly responsible for the deaths of 168 people, his actions contributed significantly to the execution of the crime. Prosecutors and victims of the attack argue that Nichols bears full responsibility for the deaths of innocent people. Terry Nichols is currently imprisoned at ADX Federal Prison in Florence, Colorado, where he is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Nichols cannot be eligible for parole because of his significant role in the attack, although he was not a direct offender of the bombing. Nichols' existence in prison serves not only as a warning to other terrorists, but also as a reminder of the extensive terrorism and the devastation it can cause. Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh were terrorists who not only killed 168 innocent people, but also left a dark legacy in American history. Although McVeigh carried out the attack, Nichols played a key role in planning and preparing for the terrorist attack. The Oklahoma City bombing was not only an act of terrorism, but also a warning about the dangers of radicalization and hatred of the government. James Byrd Jr. Beaumont, Texas, aged 49, died June 7, 1998. James Byrd Jr. was born on May 25, 1949, in Jasper, Texas. He was a black man who lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. Byrd was a construction worker and father of 3 children. On June 7, 1998, Byrd was the victim of a brutal hate crime. While walking home, he was abducted by 3 white assailants, beaten, and dragged through a street in a brutal lynching. The case shocked the nation and sparked debate about the death penalty for racial crimes. The murder of James Byrd Jr. on June 7, 1998, was one of the most prominent racial hate crimes in American history. Although Byrd was the victim, the case was shocking not only because of the brutality of the crime, but also because of the clear racial motives of the perpetrators. Byrd's execution sparked debate about the death penalty and hate crime treatment in the United States. In this story, we will learn about this horrific case and those responsible. On the morning of June 7, 1998, James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old black man, was walking home after drinking. While walking down a deserted street, he was abducted by 3 white assailants, John William King, Lawrence Russell Brewer, and Sean Allen Berry. They brutally beat him and chained him to the back of their truck. They then dragged Byrd for about 2.5 miles on a dirt road, leaving a trail of blood. Byrd was eventually stabbed to death, and his body dumped on the side of the road. The attack was not simply an act of murder, but a horrific act, clearly motivated by racial hatred. The assailants not only killed Byrd, but also brutally tortured him because of the color of his skin in an attack on the black community. The Byrd attack had a clear motive: racial hatred. The killers were motivated by white supremacist and racist beliefs. John William King, Lawrence Russell Brewer, and Sean Allen Berry all had a history of involvement with extremist groups, and hatred of black people was the driving force behind their crime. Before the crime, all 3 had participated in white supremacist groups and expressed hatred of black people. John William King, in particular, was the mastermind of the attack. He had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan and was the one who planned Byrd's execution. The actions of these men are a testament to the dangers of racist ideology and the brutality it can cause when left unchecked. Following the attack, the police and the local community quickly launched an investigation. The killers, after committing their brutal act, tried to cover their tracks and escape. However, one of the suspects, Sean Allen Berry, was arrested when the police discovered his involvement in the incident. Through interrogations and investigations, the 3 killers were finally arrested. After a thorough investigation, their cruelty and racial motives were clearly established. Lawrence Russell Brewer and John William King, along with Berry, were prosecuted and brought to trial. This event made the case one of the most shocking racially motivated murders in America. The trial of the 3 men in the murder of James Byrd Jr. captured the nation's attention. The trial lasted for months, and Brewer and King were ultimately sentenced to death for murder motivated by racial hatred. Sean Allen Berry, the only person not directly involved in the lynching of Byrd, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial was not only a legal battle, but also a national debate about the use of the death penalty for racial crimes. Many people supported the death penalty for these criminals, arguing that it was a fair punishment for the atrocities they had committed. However, the case also sparked debate about the fairness and effectiveness of the death penalty in modern society. The murder of James Byrd Jr. was not just a crime, but also a symbol of the deep racial hatred in American society. The killers not only killed Byrd, but also deeply wounded the black community and society as a whole. This case reminds us of the existence of racism and the consequences it can cause. With the death sentences of John William King and Lawrence Russell Brewer, the community has sent a strong message of condemnation of racially motivated crimes. However, this case continues to be a warning about the dangers of extremism and hatred, which can lead to brutal crimes and erode humane values in society. Gary Leon Ridgway, 1949, aged 76, Utah. Gary Leon Ridgway, born February 18, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, is one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, was responsible for the deaths of at least 49 women in the Seattle, Washington area during the 1980s and 1990s. Although he was spared the death penalty due to a plea deal, Ridgway remains a prime example of the brutality of serial killers. His murders were not motivated by race or religion, but were motivated primarily by lust and personal gratification. Gary Ridgway, nicknamed the Green River Killer, was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. During the 1980s and 1990s, Ridgway went on a murder spree, killing at least 49 women. Although many believe the actual number is much higher. The murders shocked the nation, not only because of their brutality, but also because Ridgway was able to go on a killing spree for so long without being caught. Gary Ridgway's story is a lesson in the dangers of serial killers, as well as the dark and terrifying nature of their minds. Gary Ridgway was no ordinary criminal. He had been committing serial murders for a long time to satisfy his personal desires. His victims were mostly prostitutes or vulnerable women, whom he approached and lured into secluded areas. Ridgway committed his murders by strangling them to death, then dumping their bodies in remote areas near the Green River in Seattle, Washington, where he lived. As a result, Ridgway became a public figure, and his case prompted the police to take drastic measures to find the killer. Ridgway continued to systematically murder women for many years without being discovered. Despite the investigation by the police, Ridgway did a good job of concealing his actions. Ridgway's victims had no apparent racial or religious affiliation, but his choice of victims demonstrated a clear disregard for human life. Ridgway's victims were predominantly women from disadvantaged backgrounds, making them easy targets for his crimes. Unlike many other serial killers, Gary Ridgway was not motivated by racial, religious, or personal hatred. Instead, his motives stemmed from a desire to satisfy his lust and to gain power over his victims. Ridgway admitted that he only killed women because he could not control his urges and because he felt satisfied by killing them. For Ridgway, the murders were acts of emotional release and self-satisfaction. During his interrogations, Ridgway showed a cold, remorseless demeanor for his actions. He did not feel sorry for his victims, but simply acknowledged his actions. This highlights the lack of emotion and inhumanity in the psychology of a serial killer. Ridgway was not a killer out of hatred or revenge, but only for the personal satisfaction and sense of power he gained from taking the lives of others. Although Gary Ridgway had been committing a series of murders for years, he was not caught until 2001. The extensive investigation into the serial murder case attracted the attention of the public and the authorities. Authorities conducted thorough investigations, collected evidence from the crime scenes, and interviewed people involved. Using advanced DNA technology, police finally found Ridgway in 2001. Ridgway was arrested and charged with the murders of 49 women. However, in a plea deal, Ridgway agreed to admit his guilt and help police locate the bodies that had not been found. This saved him from the death penalty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite the plea agreement, however, Ridgway's actions still left the community and his victims feeling immense pain. Gary Ridgway went to trial in 2003, and after pleading guilty, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence did not ease the pain of the victims' families, but at least it gave them some relief from the years of obscurity that had plagued the case. Ridgway showed no remorse throughout the trial, but his plea deal helped ease the emotional pain of the victims' families. Gary Ridgway is a terrifying example of a serial killer who is consumed by the darkness of lust and cruelty. While his motives were not racial or religious hatred, the brutality of Ridgway's murders caused deep trauma to his victims and the community as a whole. Gary Ridgway's story reminds us of the dangers of serial killers and the horrific effects they can have on society. These horrific cases, despite their different motives, all reveal a terrifying truth about the darkness in the human mind. From the brutal terrorist acts of Jahar Tsarnaev, to the racially motivated massacres of Dylan Roof and Robert Bowers, to the cold-blooded crimes of Gary Ridgway, all are examples of hatred, brutality, and lack of humanity in society. These criminals have taken the lives of dozens of innocent people, causing indelible pain and trauma to their families and communities. These cases are not only heartbreaking stories, but also warnings about the dangers of extremist and violent ideology. We are not only dealing with murderers, but also with false beliefs, racism, and a lack of understanding of human values. The stories of these victims will always be told, not only to remember them, but also to remind us of the importance of love, tolerance, and solidarity in society. Let these stories be the motivation for us to build a better world where hate has no place. Thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts on these cases in the comments section below the video.